The lawyer's office smelled like stale cigars and 100 years of paper secrets. Emmett sat shoulder to shoulder with his brothers, a straight line of Sloan men facing a mountain of mahogany. Wade, the oldest, tapped a restless rhythm on the chair's armrest, a beat of pure impatience. Porter, the middle child, shifted his weight, his work boots scuffing the floorboards, the sound like sandpaper on a nerve. Outside, the afternoon sun sliced through the window blinds, laying stripes of light and shadow across the room. It felt like they were already in a cage. The lawyer, a man named Peters who looked like he'd been born in that leather chair, cleared his throat. The sound was like dust falling off a forgotten book. The will was open on the desk. Its pages were yellowed, covered in the steady, careful handwriting of their grandfather, Clayton Sloan. He'd written every word himself just 3 months before his heart gave out. No confusing legal jargon. Just simple sentences that landed like a blacksmith's hammer. To my grandsons, Wade, Porter, and Emmett, the lawyer read, his voice as dry as the paper itself. I leave my land, all 300 acres of it, but there is a condition. Wade leaned forward, his drumming fingers finely still. You may only claim your inheritance when all 3 of you agree, unanimously, on how the land should be divided. The lawyer looked up over his spectacles, letting the words sink in. Until that day, until I have a document with all 3 of your signatures, the entire property remains in trust. No sale, no lease, no access. Wade's face, which was usually set in a look of confident command, twisted into confusion. That's it? We just have to agree? The lawyer nodded slowly. That's what it says. He closed the will, the sound a soft final thud. Your grandfather was very specific. He set no timeline. You could settle this in an hour, or it could take a lifetime. But until you do, none of you own a single square foot of that land. Emmett wasn't looking at the lawyer. He was staring at a brown water stain on the ceiling, a ghost map of some long-ago storm. He could picture his grandfather at the kitchen table, pen in hand, the smell of coffee in the air. He'd spent his last weeks on this will, stopping sometimes to gaze out the window at the old property, the place where he was born, the house that had stood empty for 30 years. Why would he do it this way? Why turn his final gift into a puzzle? Wade shot to his feet, the chair scraping back. Well, this is easy enough, he announced, his confidence already flooding back. As the oldest, he was used to making the decisions for everyone. We split it 3 ways, fair and square, 100 acres each. We sign the paper, we walk away, rich. Porter nodded, ever the practical one, but his gaze slid over to Emmett. What do you think, Emmett? Emmett didn't answer. He was lost in a memory from a week before their grandfather died. The old man was on the porch swing, looking at a faded photograph. It was the same photograph Emmett now carried, folded carefully, in his own shirt pocket. When Emmett had asked him what was so interesting, Clayton had just smiled that mysterious smile of his and said something that made no sense at the time. The land always tells the truth, boy. You just have to know how to listen. Emmett? Porter's voice snapped him back to the musty office. You good with that? An even split? Wade crossed his arms, a silent challenge. Unless you've got a better idea. Instead of answering, Emmett pulled the old photograph from his pocket and laid it on the desk. In the picture, a younger Clayton Sloan stood tall and proud under the giant oak tree on the old property, one hand resting on its massive trunk. The smile on his face wasn't just happy. It was triumphant. Like he'd just solved a riddle no one else even knew existed. I need to see the land first, Emmett said, his voice quiet but firm. Wade let out a sharp, frustrated sigh. For God's sake, Emmett, we've all seen it 1,000 times. It's 3 sections of dirt, the good, fertile land to the east, the flat grazing fields to the west, And that useless plot in the middle with the old house falling down on itself. He pointed a thick finger at Emmett. There's nothing to see. But Emmett knew there was. I still need to see it. The lawyer began stacking his papers, his part in this drama over for now. Gentlemen, take all the time you need. My door is open when you reach your agreement. They filed out of the office and into the oppressive afternoon heat. Wade was already on a roll, talking about the ranch he'd build on the eastern plot, the one with the creek. Porter was calculating cattle prices and water rights, his mind a flurry of profit margins. Emmett trailed behind them, the photograph warm in his hand, his grandfather's words echoing in his head. The land always tells the truth. But what truth was Clayton talking about? And why did Emmett have this gnawing feeling that the answer was buried somewhere on that useless middle section, right under the shade of that ancient oak tree? The three brothers stood on a dusty street corner, sunlight beating down on their shoulders. They had no idea this simple will was about to become a war. They had no idea it would pit brother against brother. And they had no idea that their grandfather hadn't just left them land. He'd left them a test. A test only one of them was meant to pass. They stood on the ridge, the whole 300 acres spread out below them like a map of their future. To the east, the land was a lush, rolling green, bisected by a creek that shone like a silver vein in the sun. To the west, the land stretched out flat and wide, a perfect sea of grass for grazing cattle. And right there in the middle, like a forgotten memory, sat the old homestead. The house where Clayton Sloan had been born 82 years ago was a skeleton of brick and timber, its roof sagging, its windows like vacant eyes. But next to it, the great oak tree stood defiant, its branches reaching out over land so dry and cracked it looked like it hadn't seen rain in a generation. Wade pointed to the east, his voice full of ownership. That's mine. That creek runs all year. I'll have the best ranch in the county. Porter nodded, his gaze fixed on the west. And I'll take the grazing land. I've already got 2 buyers lined up, ready to lease it for their herds. They both turned to look at Emmett. His eyes were locked on the middle section, on that decaying house, on that stubborn, ancient tree. So, you get the old place? Wade said, and it wasn't a question. It was a declaration. It's only fair. Nothing there but memories anyway. No water, no good soil. Just a pile of bricks nobody's set foot in since Grandpa moved to town in '53. Emmett started walking down the ridge, his boots kicking up clouds of fine, red dust. The other 2 followed, their voices floating on the hot wind behind him. It's a fair deal, Emmett, Porter called out. We all get what we want. You get the history. We get the working land. Emmett didn't stop until he reached the oak tree. He placed his hand on its trunk. The bark was rough and warm, like the calloused hand of an old man. He remembered coming here as a boy, sitting in this very spot while his grandfather told stories. Stories about his own father planting this tree. Stories about growing up in that house. And strange, whispered stories about the secrets the old land kept. Wade trudged up beside him, breathing heavily. Look, I get it. You have memories here. We all do. But memories don't pay the mortgage. He gestured vaguely at the dilapidated house. The land we're offering you, it might be worth 1/10 of what our parcels are worth, but it's yours. No fight. Just sign the paper. Emmett didn't take his eyes off the tree. Why did he write the will that way? He asked, his voice low. What? Wade snapped, his patience wearing thin. Grandpa, why make us all agree on it? Why not just divide it himself and save us the trouble? Wade shrugged, dismissing the question. The old man was losing it at the end. Probably didn't remember how a proper will is supposed to work. But Emmett knew that was a lie. His grandfather's mind had been as sharp as a brand new nail right up to his last breath. Sharp enough to craft that strange will. Sharp enough to smile that knowing smile in the photograph. Sharp enough to leave behind a trail of cryptic clues that felt more deliberate than forgetful. Porter joined them under the shade of the oak, wiping sweat from his brow. So, we got a deal? You take this, we take ours, and we're all happy. Emmett pressed his hand harder against the bark. He remembered another story his grandfather used to tell. Another one of his strange sayings. He'd press his ear to the dry ground and say, "When the silence gets deep enough, boy, you can hear the water coming." Emmett had always thought it was just poetry, the ramblings of an old man who loved his land. But now, standing here, with that mysterious photograph in his pocket and his brothers breathing down his neck, he wondered if it was something more. He wondered if it was a map. "I need a week," Emmett said. Wade's face reddened. "A week? A week for what?" "To think about it." "There's nothing to think about!" Wade's voice boomed across the empty land. "We're handing you a piece of this family's history on a silver platter, little brother. It's a gift." But Emmett was already turning, walking toward the crumbling house, leaving them standing there in frustration. He had to be alone. He had to walk this land, touch this soil, and remember every single strange thing his grandfather had ever said. Because his gut was screaming at him that this wasn't about dividing land. This was a hunt. His grandfather had hidden something important. And he had a terrible feeling that whoever found it first wouldn't just inherit a piece of property. They would inherit the power to change everything. For 3 days and 3 nights, Emmett was the only soul on the property. He brought a bedroll, a crate of canned beans, and an old kerosene lantern. The house was a death trap, its floors rotted and its walls groaning under the weight of time, so he made his camp right under the protective branches of the great oak. At night, he'd lie on his back, staring up through the leaves at a sky overflowing with stars, and he'd sift through his memories, searching for clues. The more he thought, the more he realized his grandfather's ramblings weren't random at all. They were pieces of a puzzle. He remembered being 10 years old, trying to carve his initials into the oak's trunk with a pocket knife. Clayton had grabbed his wrist. His grip wasn't rough, but it was firm, absolute. "Don't you hurt this tree, boy," he'd said, his voice serious. "It's doing important work." When Emmett asked what kind of work a tree could possibly do, his grandfather had just winked. "Keeping secrets," he'd whispered, and pointing the way. On the 4th morning, Emmett walked the 1/4 mile to the neighboring property. Fern Barrett, a woman of 72 with eyes that had seen it all, still lived in the same small house she'd lived in for 50 years. She'd known his grandfather better than almost anyone. When she opened her screen door, her face broke into a surprised smile. "Emmett Sloan, haven't seen you out this way since the funeral." "Miss Fern," Emmett said, holding his hat in his hands. "I need to ask you about my grandfather." She ushered him into her kitchen, which smelled of cinnamon and strong coffee. As she poured him a cup, he pulled out the photograph. "He was looking at this the last time I saw him," he explained, smiling like he knew a secret the whole world had missed. Fern took the photo, her wrinkled finger tracing the outline of the oak tree. "Oh, Clayton loved that tree," she said softly. "He'd sit under it for hours on end. I could see him from my porch. Sometimes he'd just press his hand flat on the ground, like he was listening for something." She handed the photo back. "He said some strange things in those last months. Told me once the land was thirsty, but it wouldn't be for long. Said the answer was right under his nose, had been there the whole time, just waiting for someone who cared enough to look." Emmett's heart started beating faster. "Did he ever say what the answer was?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But he was happy about it, like he'd finally solved a riddle that had been bothering him his whole life." She refilled his coffee. "Your brothers came by last week, you know, Wade and Porter. Wanted to know if I'd sell my land once they took over theirs." "What did you tell them?" "Told them I'm not going anywhere," she said with a defiant glint in her eye. "Then they started talking about your grandfather's will. About the middle section. The one with the old house. Emmett leaned forward. What did they say about it? Fern's expression soured. Wade called it worthless, a booby prize. Said whoever got stuck with it was getting cheated. Porter just laughed. She paused, her gaze drifting out the window toward the distant oak. But your grandfather. He never thought that land was worthless. He chose to leave that house, sure. But he never sold the land. Never. In all those years, he never let anyone else have it. Why do you think that was, Emmett? Emmett looked out the window with her, his eyes fixed on the tree. I don't know, Miss Fern. But I'm about to find out. That evening, as the sun began to bleed across the horizon, Emmett did something he'd never done before. He walked the entire perimeter of that 100-acre plot. Every fence post, every dip in the terrain, every foot. He noticed where the ground was baked hard as rock and where it was soft under his boots. He saw where the weeds grew thick and desperate and where the earth was barren. And that's when he saw it. The oak tree wasn't just sitting on flat land. It was at the exact center of a massive, shallow depression, a natural bowl. It was so subtle you'd never notice it unless you were looking for it, walking it, feeling it with your own 2 feet. The ground sloped gently down toward the tree from every direction. It was a place designed by nature to collect water. As dusk settled, Emmett sat with his back against the oak's trunk. He remembered another of Clayton's cryptic sayings. The old man would be sitting on his porch, watching the shadows grow long, and he'd say, "The shadow always points to what's alive, boy. Always." Emmett looked at the long, dark shadow of the oak stretching out across the ground. It was pointing southeast, pointing toward a patch of empty, dusty dirt. Pointing to absolutely nothing. But his grandfather never said things for no reason. Emmett stood up and walked to the very tip of the shadow. He knelt, pressing his palm flat against the earth. And he felt it. The ground here was cooler. Just slightly. But it was unmistakable. It was as if something deep beneath the surface was different from the sun-baked soil all around it. He stayed there as darkness fell, his hand on that one cool spot, his mind racing. And then, when the world went completely silent, no wind, no crickets, just a profound and total stillness, he did what he'd seen his grandfather do 100 times. He pressed his ear to the ground, and he listened. At first he thought it was the blood rushing in his own head, a faint, deep hum. But he held his breath, pressed his ear harder against the cool dirt, and then he heard it. It was a sound that had no business being there. A rushing sound, distant, muffled by tons of earth and rock, but it was there. It was the undeniable sound of moving water. Emmett shot up, his heart pounding against his ribs. He stood perfectly still, the night silent all around him, but the sound was now roaring in his memory. It wasn't a trickle. It was a river. An underground river, flowing fast and deep, so far down that no one would ever know it was there. Unless they were told exactly how and exactly where to listen. His grandfather had known. Of course he'd known. That's why he protected the tree. That's why he pressed his hand to the ground. That's why he smiled that triumphant smile in the photograph. The oak's ancient roots must have tapped into that hidden source, a secret lifeline that kept it green and alive, while everything else withered and died. Emmett looked around at the dark, worthless land his brothers had so casually dismissed. They were planning their futures on parcels that looked good on the surface. But this land, this forgotten middle section, was sitting on top of a liquid gold mine. In this dry, thirsty region, whoever controlled the water, controlled everything. His mind was spinning. This discovery changed the entire game. Property values, water rights, the future of all 3 of them. If he could prove this underground river existed, if he could drill a well and tap into it, his inheritance wouldn't just be equal to his brothers. It would be 10 times more valuable. But then a cold thought stopped him dead in his tracks. Why didn't his grandfather just tell him? He could have divided the land himself, given Emmett this section, and explained its secret. Instead, he wrote that bizarre will. He forced them all to agree. Why? Emmett pulled out the photograph again, holding it up in the dim light of his lantern. He looked at his grandfather's smile, at the way his hand rested on the oak. And that's when he noticed something he had never seen before, a detail lost in the shadows. In the background of the photo, standing apart from Clayton, were two other figures. Two young men. Their postures were stiff, their faces unsmiling. Emmett recognized them instantly from old family albums. It was his own father, and his uncle. Wade and Porter's fathers. And they looked like they were on opposite sides of a silent war. The next morning they came for their answer. Wade and Porter rode their horses right up to the oak tree, dismounting like they already owned the place. "Your week's almost up, Emmett," Wade said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Have you made a decision?" Emmett looked from their determined faces down to the ground where he'd heard the rushing water. He could end this right now. He could tell them what he'd found and watch the greed and shock transform their faces. He could watch the power shift in a single heartbeat. But something held him back. An instinct. A feeling that this wasn't what his grandfather wanted. This wasn't the point of the test. "I need more time," he said. Wade's jaw clenched. "More time? How much more time?" "Another week." Porter stepped forward, his expression a mix of frustration and pity. "Emmett, this is getting ridiculous. We're trying to be fair. You get the house, the memories. We get land we can actually work. Everybody wins. What is there to think about?" "I need to understand why Grandpa wrote the will this way." "Because he was old!" Wade's voice exploded, echoing in the morning stillness. "Because he wasn't thinking straight. There's no mystery here, Emmett. Just a sentimental old man who couldn't let go of the past." But Emmett knew they were wrong. Every line in that will was a choice. Every condition was a clue. Clayton Sloan had been playing a long game, and Emmett was only just beginning to understand the rules. "One more week," he said, his voice unwavering. "Then we settle this. I promise." Wade stormed over to his horse, his face flushed with anger. "Fine, 1 week. But that's it. When that week is up, you either sign the agreement we proposed, or we're getting the lawyers involved. We are not waiting around forever while you play detective with an old man's ghost." They mounted their horses and galloped away, leaving Emmett alone in a cloud of dust. He watched them disappear over the ridge, then turned his attention back to the oak tree, back to the ground beneath it, back to the secret river flowing in the darkness below. His grandfather hadn't just left him a clue. He'd left him a test of character. And Emmett knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the real challenge wasn't finding the secret. It was deciding what to do with it. He knelt by the tree and began to dig. Not with a shovel, but with his bare hands, clawing at the cool, dry earth. Because if there was water down there, there had to be more. If his grandfather had found it, he wouldn't have left just whispers and memories. He would have left proof, and he would have hidden it where only someone who truly loved this place would ever think to look. He dug for nearly 2 hours, his fingers raw and his back aching. The sun climbed higher, beating down on him, but he didn't stop. He was digging at the spot where the oak's shadow ended at dusk, the spot where the ground felt cooler, the spot right above where he'd heard the impossible sound of the underground river. And then his fingers hit something hard. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a root. It was the cold, unyielding shock of metal. His heart hammered in his chest as he carefully scraped away the remaining dirt. It was a box, a small, iron box, rusted at the corners but still sealed tight. It was buried about 2 feet down, exactly where the clues had led him. He heaved it out of the hole and sat back against the tree, his hands trembling. This was it, the heart of the mystery. Whatever truth his grandfather wanted him to find was locked inside. With a small rock, he pried at the rusted lid. It groaned in protest, then popped open. Inside, wrapped in a thick, oil-stained cloth, was a bundle of papers. He unfolded them with painstaking care, his breath held tight in his lungs. The first document was an old survey map, dated 1891. It showed the entire 300-acre property, but with markings he'd never seen on any modern map. Faded ink lines, drawn by a steady hand, all converged on this exact spot, right under the oak tree. And in the margins, in the elegant script of his great-grandfather, were the words, Underground Spring. Depth approx. 40th depth, flow rate strong. Year-round source. The second document was a geological report from 1952, the year before his grandfather had abandoned the old house. It confirmed everything. A massive aquifer, a natural underground reservoir, ran directly beneath this middle section. It was filled with fresh, clean water. A significant, accessible volume of it. The third and final paper made all the air leave Emmett's body. It was a letter. Written in his grandfather's familiar hand, dated just 3 months before he died. To whoever finds this, it began. I hope it's you, Emmett. I hope you're the one who cared enough about the memories to look past what was on the surface. Your brothers are good men, but they see land as a commodity. You've always seen it as a home. That's what matters. This water has been our family's secret for 100 years. My father found it. I had it confirmed. Now, it's yours to use wisely. But remember this, boy. This isn't about getting rich. It's about understanding that the things that look worthless on the outside often hold the greatest value. The test was never about the land. It was about the heart. And then came the final lines, the ones that felt like a ton of bricks on his chest. Share this discovery with your brothers, or keep it for yourself. That choice will define who you really are. Your grandfather, Clayton. Emmett read the letter 3 times, the words burning themselves into his mind. His grandfather had known. He'd orchestrated this whole thing. He'd predicted that Wade and Porter, blinded by dollar signs, would grab for the obvious prizes. He'd bet everything on the hope that Emmett, the sentimental one, would be drawn back to this place, to the memories, to the tree. He had set the stage, laid out the clues, and then stepped back to see what would happen. But the final act, that was up to Emmett. Share the secret, or keep it. He looked at the documents spread out before him. With this proof, he held all the cards. He could drill a well, irrigate this entire 100-acre section, and turn this worthless land into the most valuable real estate in the county. He'd have something worth more than both of his brothers' parcels combined. Water rights were power, water rights were a dynasty. Or, he could tell them, he could show them the map, the report, the letter. He could turn their grandfather's test into a lesson for all of them. A lesson about family, about looking deeper, about what things are truly worth. The sound of crunching footsteps broke the silence. Emmett looked up. It was Porter walking toward the tree, alone. Wade's on his way to the lawyer's office tomorrow morning, Porter said, his voice strained. He stopped a few feet away, his arms crossed. He says we've been patient long enough. Then his eyes fell to the open box, to the ancient papers spread across Emmett's lap. What is all that? This was the moment. The crossroads his grandfather had built for him. The choice. Does he tell the truth? Right here? Right now? Or does he hide the papers, protect his discovery, and claim the prize for himself? Porter took a step closer, his curiosity getting the better of him. Emmett, what did you find? The words from the letter echoed in his head. That choice will define who you really are. But then he remembered something else his grandfather had said, years ago, right here under this tree. The land tests everyone, son. Some fail by being too greedy. Others fail by being too generous. The trick is knowing which moment calls for which heart. Emmett looked at his brother. He saw the genuine confusion in Porter's face. This was the man he'd grown up with, the man who had also loved their grandfather. Porter wasn't greedy, he was just practical. And in that moment, Emmett realized the test wasn't just for him. It was for all three of them. It was a test to see if they could find their way back to being a family, not just three men fighting over an inheritance. "I found the answer," Emmett said slowly, carefully folding the papers and placing them back in the box. "The answer to why Grandpa wrote the will the way he did." He closed the lid. "But I need you to trust me. For 2 more days. Can you do that? Can you stop Wade from going to the lawyer for just 2 more days?" Porter stared at him, his face a mask of uncertainty. "What answer? What are you talking about?" Emmett looked his brother square in the eye. "I'm talking about what this land is really worth," he said. "And why none of us should sign a single piece of paper until we understand what Grandpa was trying to teach us." Porter, against his better judgment, managed to hold Wade off for 1 more day. But on the second day, at the crack of dawn, they both arrived. And this time, Wade wasn't asking. He was demanding. "Enough of these games, Emmett," he boomed, his voice rolling across the quiet land. "We're settling this. Now." Emmett was waiting for them under the oak tree. The iron box sat at his feet. He had spent the night wrestling with his decision, playing out every scenario, trying to find the path that honored his grandfather's memory while also doing right by his brothers. The answer had come to him in the still, dark hours before sunrise. It was a gamble, but he had to believe it was the right one. "You're right," Emmett said, his voice calm. "It's time to settle it. But first, you both need to see something." Wade crossed his arms, his posture radiating impatience. "We've seen all there is to see. 100 acres of worthless dirt and a house that's about to fall over. You're holding up our entire future because you're emotionally attached to a pile of rubble." "The house isn't why I want this section," Emmett said. He bent down and picked up the iron box. "Grandpa left something buried here, something he wanted one of us to find, and it changes everything." Porter's eyes widened slightly. "Changes everything, how?" Emmett opened the box. He didn't pull out the letter. Not yet. Instead, he held up the old survey map from 1891. "This land," he said, his voice steady, "is sitting on top of an underground river. It's been here for over 100 years. Great-grandpa found it. Grandpa had it confirmed in 1952. There's enough fresh water down there to irrigate every single acre of this property. And probably both of yours, too." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Wade snatched the map from Emmett's hand, his eyes devouring the faded ink, the old markings. Porter leaned over his shoulder, his face pale with shock. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, broken only by the rustle of the oak leaves above them. "This is real," Wade finally whispered. The arrogance was gone from his voice, replaced by a hollow sense of awe. "There's a geological report, too," Emmett said, handing it to Porter. "And a letter from Grandpa, explaining why he set up the will the way he did." Porter looked up from the documents, his eyes filled with a dawning, painful understanding. He knew. This whole time, he knew there was water here, and he let us think this land was worthless. "He didn't let us think anything," Emmett said carefully, choosing his words. "He tested us. He wanted to see what we would value more, what was on the surface, or what was hidden underneath. He wanted to see if we'd be fair, or if we'd be greedy. He wanted to see if we would remember what really mattered." Wade's face was turning a deep shade of red, but it wasn't from anger this time. It was from shame. "So you found it," he said, his voice rough. "You passed his test. So you get the water rights. You get the most valuable piece of land by a mile. And what do we get? Land that's worthless without your charity." "That's not what I'm saying," Emmett insisted. He took the map back from Wade, Grandpa's letter, it left me a choice. He told me I could share this discovery, or I could keep it for myself. He said that choice would define who I really am. And? Porter's voice was barely a whisper. What had his little brother chosen? Emmett walked over to the invisible line that separated his section from Wade's. The geological report says the main aquifer is under my land. Yes. That's where it's closest to the surface. But it flows from the east. It flows from under your section, Wade. He then turned and looked toward the west. And it continues on, deep under your grazing land, Porter. We're all sitting on the same river. It's just easiest to reach it from right here, under this tree. He turned to face them, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. We could fight about this. We could hire lawyers and argue about water rights and property lines until we're all broke and hate each other. We could tear this family apart over it. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Or we could do what Grandpa actually wanted. We could work together. We could share the resource. We could build something that benefits all three of us, together. Wade was staring at the ground, his jaw tight. Porter was looking at the oak tree as if he'd never truly seen it before. He wasn't trying to cheat any of us, Emmett continued, his voice filled with passion. He was trying to teach us. He was trying to show us that the best things in life, the most valuable things, aren't the ones you can grab easily. They're the ones you have to care enough to search for. The ones you find by valuing what other people overlook. He was trying to remind us that family comes before profit. Porter's voice cracked. You could have kept this a secret. You could have drilled your own well and owned all the water. We would have never known. I know, Emmett said softly. Why didn't you? Wade finally looked up. His eyes were glistening. Emmett thought about his grandfather's smile in the photograph, about the feel of the rough bark under his hand, about the final words in that letter. Because Grandpa didn't leave me a test about land or water, he said. He left me a test about character. He was testing to see if I was the kind of man who shares his good fortune instead of hoarding it. He was testing to see if I understood that our family is worth more than any amount of water, or money, or land. I called this land worthless, Wade said, his voice thick with regret. I called you a fool for wanting it. You didn't know, Emmett said. I should have known, Wade shot back, his voice hardening with a new kind of determination. I should have trusted him. I should have trusted that Grandpa had a reason for everything he did. He looked at Emmett, then at Porter. So what do we do now? How do we make this right? Emmett picked up the letter from the box, the one his grandfather had written to him, but had meant for all of them. We read this, he said. Together, all three of us. And then we decide, as brothers, as a family, how to honor what he was trying to teach us. The three of them stood in the long shadow of the oak tree, the morning sun climbing into the sky. The documents were spread on the ground between them, a bridge across the chasm that had almost torn them apart. And for the first time since their grandfather had died, they weren't thinking about property lines or profit margins. They were thinking about what it meant to be family, and about how to pass a test that had nothing to do with land and everything to do with the heart. They sat together under the great oak, passing their grandfather's letter from hand to hand. Wade read it twice, his lips moving silently, as if trying to commit every word to memory. Porter held it the longest, his thumb tracing the old man's signature over and over again. He knew us, Porter said, his voice full of wonder. He knew exactly how we'd act. He knew Wade and I would go for the obvious prize, and he knew you'd go for the memories. Wade carefully placed the letter on top of the geological report. And he knew we'd fight, he added. He knew we'd pressure you. He knew we'd call this place worthless. He looked directly at Emmett, his eyes clear and honest. He wasn't just testing you. He was testing all of us. Maybe, Emmett said. Or maybe he was just giving us a chance, A chance to prove him right. A chance to remember all the things he taught us, and to wonder if they meant more than we ever gave him credit for. Porter got to his feet and walked to the edge of the property, looking out at the 3 sections of land that were now so fundamentally changed. So the water is under all our land, he mused, thinking it through. But it's easiest to get to from here, which means whoever owns this section, they control it all. That's the law, Wade confirmed grimly. Water rights belong to the landowner who taps the source. If Emmett drills a well here, it's his water. We'd have to pay him for access. I don't want you to pay me, Emmett said firmly. I want us to build it together. A shared well, a shared irrigation system, shared profits. Wade let out a short, tired laugh. It wasn't a laugh of mockery, but of weary self-recognition. A year ago, I would have called you the world's biggest fool for saying that. I would have said you were throwing away the winning lottery ticket. He reached over and picked up the old photograph that had started this whole journey. But looking at this now, seeing Grandpa's face, knowing what he went through to set this all up, he shook his head. I think being a fool for your family is exactly what he wanted from us. Porter turned back from the ridge. How do we make it work? Legally, I mean. How do we structure it so one of us can't just change their mind in 20 years and screw the others over? Emmett had already thought about this during his long, sleepless night. We form a company, a partnership. The 3 of us, equal shares. We drill the well here, on my land, but we all pay for it. We all maintain it. And we all benefit from it. The land itself stays divided into our 3 100-acre parcels, just like Grandpa's will intended. But the water belongs to the Sloan family partnership. And if one of us ever wants to sell their land, Wade asked, testing the idea. The water rights don't go with the land, Emmett explained. They stay with the partnership. Whoever buys a piece of this property has to honor our agreement. We write it into the deeds themselves. We make it permanent. Porter nodded slowly, a small smile finally reaching his face. That's fair, he said. That's more than fair. He looked at Wade. What do you think? Wade stood up and brushed the dust from his jeans. He walked over to the ancient oak and placed his hand flat against the trunk, just as he'd seen his grandfather and Emmett do. I think we've been looking at this whole thing wrong from the very beginning, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Grandpa didn't leave us 300 acres of land. He left us a choice. Be brothers or be competitors. Share or fight. Trust each other or suspect each other. He turned to face them, his decision made. I vote for brothers. I vote for trust. And I am so sorry it took me this long to see it. Porter moved to stand beside him, placing his hand next to Wade's on the rough bark. I'm with Wade. We do this together. Equal partners, equal shares, the way it was always meant to be. Emmett stood and completed the circle, his hand covering both of theirs on the ancient tree. 3 brothers, 3 hands, 1 family. Then we're agreed, Emmett said, a wave of relief washing over him. We'll go to the lawyer tomorrow. We'll sign the division papers, but we'll add a condition. The Sloan family partnership, permanent and binding. They stood there for a long time, their hands pressed against the tree that had guarded their family's greatest secret. The tree that had watched 3 generations grow. The tree that would soon stand a sentinel over their shared future. Wade was the first to pull his hand away, and he was grinning. You know what's funny? He said. That land I wanted so badly? The eastern section with the creek? I found out that creek runs bone dry 3 months out of the year. I would have been hauling water by next summer. Porter chuckled. You think that's funny? I had a surveyor look at my grazing land last week. He said the soil is so alkaline you can hardly grow weeds on it. I would have spent a fortune just to get decent grass. Emmett smiled. So none of us got what we thought we were getting. No, Wade agreed. his smile widening. We got something better. We got what Grandpa really wanted to give us. A reason to need each other. A reason to remember that some things are more important than profit. The sun was high in the sky now, and the oak's shadow had shrunk. It no longer pointed to the secret buried in the earth. But it didn't have to. They had found it. Not just the water, but the lesson that came with it. The truth their grandfather had buried deeper than any spring. Porter clapped Emmett on the shoulder. I owe you an apology, little brother. For pushing you. For calling you sentimental. For not seeing what you saw. We all missed it at first, Emmett said. That was the whole point. Wade picked up the iron box, holding it with a new kind of reverence. We should keep this. The maps, the report, the letter. We need to pass them down to our own kids someday. Let them know their great-grandfather was a whole lot smarter than all of us put together. They gathered the documents, closing the box on the secret that had almost destroyed them, and had ultimately saved them. Tomorrow they would become business partners. Soon, they would hire a drilling crew and unleash the century-old river hidden beneath their feet. But today, right now, they were just three brothers, standing under an old oak tree, finally understanding the true nature of their inheritance. It wasn't land, or water, or money. It was the wisdom to choose family over fortune, and the humility to learn from the dead. 6 months later, the well was a reality. Clean, cold water pumped up from 43 feet below the surface, a steady and powerful flow, just as the old report had predicted. The drilling crew said they'd never seen a stronger source in the region. There was more than enough water for 3 ranches, with plenty to spare. Wade did build a house on his eastern section, but it was smaller and more practical than the mansion he'd first imagined. He raised cattle, healthy and strong, on pasture that was now perpetually green. The creek still ran dry in the heat of August, but it no longer mattered. The well never failed. Porter, with the help of steady irrigation, had managed to amend the alkaline soil on his western section. He now grew the best alfalfa and hay in the county. He'd gotten married in the spring, and his wife was already sketching plans for a new house, one positioned perfectly on the property line, close enough to see the great oak from their kitchen window. Emmett kept the middle section, but he was never alone there. The 3 brothers shared the cost and the labor of maintaining the well and the complex irrigation system they had built. They met once a month under the oak to talk business, but mostly they just talked. They talked about their grandfather, about the test they had so nearly failed, and about how close they had come to losing everything that mattered. The old house still stood, though Emmett had begun the slow, careful work of bringing it back to life. A new roof, then new windows, then shoring up the foundation. It was a labor of love. He was in no hurry. He'd learned that some things were worth taking your time with. Worth preserving. Fern Barrett would visit now and then, bringing a thermos of her strong coffee and stories of the old days. She'd been right all along. Clayton had never thought the land was worthless. She just hadn't known the multi-million-dollar reason why. He was a clever man, your grandfather, she'd said after Emmett showed her the letter. Much cleverer than most people ever knew. On a warm Sunday afternoon in early autumn, the 3 brothers gathered under the oak one more time. It wasn't a business meeting. It was a pilgrimage. They came just to be there together, to feel the way they used to as boys, before the world had tried to teach them that money was more important than blood. Wade brought the iron box. It had been kept in the old house, but he said it was time to do something else with it. I've been thinking, he said, setting the box on the ground. We should bury this again. Put it right back where Grandpa left it. Porter frowned. Why? We might need those documents. We have legal copies filed with the lawyer, Wade countered. These originals, Grandpa's letter, his map, his test, this belongs here, in the ground, for the next generation. Emmett understood instantly. You want to pass on the test. Not the same test, Wade clarified. They won't have to find the water. But they will need to learn the lesson. The lesson that the things that look worthless are sometimes the most valuable. The lesson that family is more important than individual success. The lesson that the old ways, the old wisdom, still has meaning. Porter's face broke into a wide grin. So, we bury it again, and we don't tell our kids where it is. We just tell them the story. We tell them their great-grandfather left a secret behind, something worth finding. Something that will teach them what they need to know about who they are. They dug the hole together, in the exact same spot where Emmett had found the box. The spot where the oak's shadow pointed in the late afternoon. The spot where the ground was always cool, a silent promise of the life-giving water that ran far below. Wade placed the box gently into the earth. Porter covered it with dirt, tamping it down with his hands. Emmett found a simple flat stone and laid it on top, a marker small enough to be missed by a casual glance, but obvious enough for anyone who was truly looking. "You think they'll figure it out?" Porter asked, looking at the stone. "If they're paying attention," Emmett replied. "If they remember the stories we tell them. If they care enough to listen to what the land is trying to say." Wade stood up, dusting the dirt from his hands. "And if they don't," he said with a grim smile, "then they'll learn the hard way. Just like we almost did." They walked away from the oak tree as the sun began to set. 3 brothers, whole again. They had learned that a true inheritance isn't something you're given. It's something you earn. It's wisdom passed down through generations. It's a test that reveals your character. It's a choice that defines your soul. Behind them, the great oak stood silent and strong, its roots drinking deep from the secret river, its branches reaching for the sky. Its trunk bore the invisible marks of a family that had been broken and then healed, a family that had learned that the greatest treasures are never lying on the surface. They're buried deep, waiting for a heart that is patient enough to search and wise enough to share what it finds. The rhythmic pulse of the well pump echoed in the twilight, a steady heartbeat for the land they now shared. 3 properties, thriving as one. 3 brothers, prospering together. And beneath it all, hidden in the cool darkness of the earth, a rusty iron box waited for the next generation. Because some lessons are too important to be told. They have to be discovered. They have to be earned. Clayton Sloan had known that. And he'd smiled in that photograph. A man content with the knowledge that, sooner or later, his boys would finally understand. The land would teach them. They just had to learn how to listen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of hidden secrets and family bonds. And check out the video on your screen now for another story about an inheritance that came with a shocking, life-changing twist. Your support helps us keep these stories alive.